Hi guys, I'm Sabrina from the Power Within Us, and we are back here with Richard Rudd. Thank you, Richard. We are just about to ask him some questions around his, his Gene Keys project, which entices so many mystery and profound matters. So I just wanted to go over some questions with you, Richard. Richard, if that's okay.
Yep.
One of the things I really wanted to ask is, how can parents introduce the Gene Keys to their kids and perhaps influence on their own activations, or maybe help with their own activations? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, as a father I can talk about that. The answer is probably not the one that you might be expecting. The way that the best way you can influence children is to be the very best of your own gene keys. That's the first question. The first answer is that it's about being really aware of your shadow and of the negative states that you can put out, especially young children. You know, children under the age of 7, for example, their organs are still forming, and therefore every state that you are in around them is actually being programmed into the formation of their body.
Yeah.
You know, so that it's imprinted. And people don't think about it like that often, because you think of a 6-year-old or something. You just you don't often think they're that absorbent, but they are incredibly absorbent.
Exactly. Yeah.
So every state, every word, every tone that you use, every thought that you hold around them, your responses, you know, all of that is just of primary importance. You know, so you have to be super patient and super understanding and super forgiving and all these things that, you know, we would like to be.
Yeah.
But that's what the Gene Keys are here to remind us, that we need to be those things around our children, especially.
Yeah.
When they get a little older, it's more complex, because there's more, you know, their wiring is more complex. So in the middle phase, from 7 to 14, going through puberty, that's the primary emotional programming time for children, you know, and it's a really interesting phase, very challenging for parents, and even more challenging for you to hold your own emotions in check. That doesn't mean repress them, but it means not react all the time to what's going on. We need to remember, you know, so what I'm really trying to drive at is that the teachings in the Gene Keys are for parents to be clearer around children, to be more harmonious, to hold this clear space so that the child can actually go through their process cleanly. And if the parents are tangled in that process with their own child, you know, playing, and it's chaos, it's terrible, because the child can't kind of see who they are, and they can't just let those experiences and those emotions come out. So the parent's job, I see, is to hold a vision around the child. And this is the second thing, is that I recommend that if you know your child's Gene Keys, is that you just look at their highest aspects, you look at their siddhis, and you just hold that vibration around them for their whole life. You know, so it might be a word like compassion, or it might be a word like grace. You know, that's one of the words for my little girl. You know, that she has the siddhi of grace, and to hold that as a frequency around her, no matter what happens in her life, no matter what she's going through, so that whenever she goes out into the world, or, you know, and comes back to me, her father, I'm always thinking of her like that. Even when she's not there, I'm thinking of her like that. And instead of worrying, or instead of seeing always going to the shadow side, you know, that's the greatest thing a parent can do for their child, because then the child has a reference point for their highest self, and you don't have to say it. It's not really useful to say it. Just hold it as a frequency around them. And really, you know, it's worth studying those siddhis and those highest energies to really understand what they are, and then look at them in your children, see your children and see them in your children, so that you really can hold them. And if you can do it from the youngest age, it's really powerful, because the children can go through their natural processes and come back to that state, and they will always come back to you. You know, even in the most challenging teenage phase, from the third 7-year cycle, from 14 to 21, it's the most challenging, when they will rebel and they will go off and they will hate you, and then they'll come back. But if you hold those frequencies around them, they will eventually come back, because there's some homing beacon in them that just goes, that's the place I recognise as me. That person, that father or that mother knows who I am. And even when I'm railing against the fates and going crazy, I will come back to that centre at some point. And when I come back to that centre, I recognise that my parent is holding that centre for me. And so it's a beautiful thing for a parent to do, and a challenging thing as well. But it simplifies parenting hugely.
Yeah.
So having the Gene Keys is really a great tool for parents.
Great. Amazing.
Yeah.
I'll get there one day. Need kids first.
Yes.
Okay, so another thing I wanted to ask, it's about the fractal families, and how do they work? How do people actually interact? You know, having the same gene keys or having the same lines, does that make a difference for when you're actually living in community and trying to be at your best and your highest city and work with other people?
Yeah, I mean, you can use the gene keys. You can overanalyze things with anything, you know. And the gene keys is about embodiment. So the idea is that as you take in the teachings, you embody them, and then you put out, you know, the highest frequencies into your community. And yes, you'll draw in, because there's a part in the in our profile, there's a part in the sequence called the attractor field.
Okay.
And you will draw in certain people, certain forces that we talk about as being a fractal. You know, the fractal means the kind of geometric, living, karmic threads that connect us together. You said soul families, you know. And those, you know, when I used to study human design and I used to analyse families and things, you would see these repeating kind of patterns, and you don't need to do that with the gene keys, because you can feel them anyway. And yes, there are certain relationships where the lines really fit beautifully, you know, and where certain sequences kind of create a dissonance. You know, so you have ones that feel a bit kind of like there's not that there's an issue, but there's a chemistry that just throws things up all the time with certain people. And then you have other ones where it's just really seamless,
easy,
you know, and easy. And we need them all. And community and society is made up by all those. And in fact, if you learn the Venus sequence, which is the relationships aspect of the gene keys, you are guided in that to go into the most dissonant ones, the most grating relationships, the most challenging ones, and to look into those chemistries specifically and give your attention to them, because it's like that's where that's where the gold is hidden, in those ones where there's the most friction, because the most friction creates the most transformation, and the most transformation creates the greatest breakthroughs for both. But ultimately, it's not about the other person, it's about you. So if there's something there for you to learn, you want to really give your attention to it. Not necessarily to the other person, but to your response, your responses, your emotions, you know, your feelings as the other person engages you. You know,
what they trigger in you.
They trigger you, exactly. Because they're triggering childhood patterns. And those are really valuable for you to then move through, let go of, you know, disentangle. Because if that person can trigger it, then another one can trigger it.
Exactly.
So use the one that's there to disentangle it, and then no one can trigger it anymore, and then you're free.
And you know what I'm going to ask? How do you disentangle it?
Well, that's getting into the nuts and bolts of the Venus sequence, you know, which is a very deep part of the gene keys, transformation and the transmission and the wisdom, and it's where my passion lies really in the Venus sequence, because it's the most challenging work there is in our relationships. And you have to dig very deep inside yourself to disentangle those patterns. So you've got to really recognise them in the moment, and that takes time, takes mindfulness, it takes awareness of the pattern, a feeling inside you that then triggers a recognition to release the pattern, and that's a whole process that takes work, and it takes support often. It takes strength, you know, a real, and it takes a real grounding in the highest frequencies, you know, because it's like you've almost got to pray sometimes, you know, you've almost got to go, come on, I really want to disengage this pattern, and it keeps coming back, and you're yearning to disengage it. When it becomes strong enough, will actually create the awareness that breaks it. But you've got to be so immersed in it, in the work, that you know you break.
Self-work.
Yeah, it is. In relationships, but it's not about processing with the partner. Actually, that's the amazing thing about the Venus sequence. You don't have to process it with your partner, which is a nightmare. You know.
Yeah.
What you do is you process it inside yourself, and you don't even have to do it while your partner's there. You know, often that's very hard in the beginning because their aura triggers it in you. So you kind of need to move away. Just take some space, and then you feel like, oh, I can breathe again. And it's just the aura. It's just some memory that's triggered something in you. It's not actually really to do with them at all. It's to do with something that got locked in you in your childhood cycles, and it's not their responsibility to deal with it. It's yours. So you have to become very accustomed to it, and be very compassionate and forgiving towards yourself. And over time, you'll get on top of it, and you'll get beyond it. You know, those victories that you have are really, those inner victories, they're really precious. You know?
So another question on that actually, because in your activation sequence, you have conscious and subconscious ways of acting, which sometimes you're really not aware of, I guess. It's really hard how can you catch yourself doing something when sometimes you don't even know you're doing it? Is that, oh God.
Well, the answer is afterwards.
Okay. So you like kick off and you trigger the pattern, like, you shout, and then you're like, oh dear.
Oh no, I've done it again.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they're very deep in us. And that's why, you know, the depth, the power of an ongoing practice of contemplation, using the gene keys and really understanding these shadows, is that it starts to saturate you, and it saturates you mentally, and then it starts to saturate your unconscious and your dreams and your emotional body, your subtle bodies. You know, it starts to go in deeper over time, and as it goes deeper, that's when you can wake up at the threshold of the pattern as it gets triggered, and just before it gets triggered. You know, that's the most powerful time. So you disable it, and how that works is a mystery, but it works. And how it's experienced is different for each person. Like sometimes for me, I catch myself in the kind of just about to launch into a pattern, and I kind of giggle inwardly. And I go, I'm not going to, something in me just goes, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. And I don't go there. And then sometimes I go there because it's an automatic pattern, and the emotion just rises, and I'm in it. But then in the middle of it is this awareness of I'm in it. And then comes the forgiveness, it doesn't matter. You know, that's what comes up in me. It doesn't matter. I don't have to give myself a hard time. It's just what comes for me is it doesn't matter. And the moment it doesn't matter comes, it's gone.
Amazing.
You know?
Yeah.
If you think it matters, then you actually make it last longer. If you think, oh no, I just didn't disable that pattern. You know, I said those words and they've gone out there and they've done their damage. You have to say it doesn't. It does matter, but it doesn't. You've got to be able to let it go. So there are lots of teachings in the Gene Keys that help you through this, but essentially it's about being saturated with the wisdom.
Okay.
It takes time.
Wow, it's a lot to process. I catch myself doing the patterns all the time and just like, oh no, here we go again. but one day,
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you, Richard. Another thing that I've noticed in the Gene Keys from my own experience actually with it, is the fact that some Gene Keys, when you listen to them or when you read them, they have such a different impact than others. So it's nearly like some of them really trigger some very strong downloads in you, and they've really changed something. I don't know. I don't know exactly what they were changing, but you can really feel that kind of frequency. Why do different Gene Keys work like that? Is that the frequency? Is that because they are? I don't know. You tell us.
Well, I think part of it's the mystery at work, and the rest of it is about timing. I think that the gene keys, every gene key, is a code that our body already holds. You know, we are saturated with this wisdom. We're made up of 64 codes over and over and over and over again. So when you're going into one of those codes, you're going into a part of your being, and certain parts are calling out for attention at certain times. So when you read a certain gene key at a certain time and it triggers something, a recognition in you, it's because that code inside you is ready to open, it's ready to awaken, to release something from inside your DNA, literally, to release the light from inside your DNA out into your being. And this is what working with the gene keys is all about. There are sequential, logical, structural ways to work with it, like using the golden path and the profile. And then there are other ways to work with it, which are more based in the original way of working with the I Ching, more the right brain approach, where like you might just flick open the book, or you might find yourself listening, drawn to a certain gene key, but without knowing why. And then you start to contemplate it, and it starts to awaken something in you. And other ones leave you cold. And it doesn't mean that they're sort of, you know, they're lacking in inspiration, because to another person they might light them up. What it means is that that part of your DNA is not at that time ready to release that information. So it's not the time. And there's a way of working with the gene keys, which I haven't yet taught actually, as a spiritual unfolding, that, you know, there's a pathway for each of us to work through the gene key, all 64 of them. You know, and at certain times certain ones will come alive, but you know, the idea is that we imprint ourselves with all of them, because then we really have immersed ourselves through the full matrix, you know. And then but they only come online at certain times, and the timing of that is mysterious. It's not something you can trace or track, because for each person it's different, and it's intuitive. So it's a different way of working with the gene keys. I'll teach it in the future, that one.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Richard.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.